Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Let's talk about evolution and probabilities. Because there's this argument, which is an old argument. The argument for design from complexity. That, it's just so complex, it has to have been designed. It's a very old argument that was originally put forth by, I'm going to say Paley, but I can't remember exactly what his name was. And he said if you're walking on a beach and you find a wristwatch or a watch, then you know that someone's been there designing things because this is too complex. Well, that argument was taken apart thoroughly and completely for all time by Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker. And it was probably done elsewhere in a more cerebral fashion, but he did a very, very good and thorough job. For example, we have a blood vessel nerve. That's what it is. A nerve goes down around the heart, through our neck, down around the heart, and back up to our brain. It's not really a big deal. It's something that it's a little bit inefficient, but it's not too big of a deal. And it comes from the time when we were fish. And we didn't have necks. So everything was just right there together. It was all fine. But then we grow necks. And so now we've got this thing where everything was together and compact. It made sense. Now it doesn't make as much sense. But still not a big deal. Giraffes, it's a big deal. They have a nerve that runs 7 or 8 feet down from their brain, around this ventricle in their heart, and back up to their brain. That doesn't make any sense. Have you ever seen the back legs of horses and dogs? They're bent sort of different than our back legs. Our back legs bend backwards. But that's necessary because we stand up. So, we're not designed well. If we were designed, there would be some telltale signs that we were designed. If we were not designed, there would be hodgepodge things, like having nerves going around pieces that don't make sense. There's no reason for it. All of these things, backward legs, bad nerves, there's other examples. You should read Richard Dawkins' book and get all these wonderful examples. All of these things make sense if we accept chance as the driving factor. Likelihood and chance and percentage of probability. If we accept probability as a driving fact, then all of these things make perfect sense. There's no mystery. Now, if you decide that it's all too complex and it had to have been designed, now you've got mysteries. Why would the designer do X, Y, and Z? Why would the designer place the urethra through a hollow muscle in such a way where muscles swell as you get older, and it swells shut the urethra so you can't urinate? As you get older, men can't urinate because their muscles have swollen shut the urethra. Brilliant, right? Who designed that? So if you believe that there's a designer, then there's all kinds of weird things that you just say, this is insane. Why would it be this way? Why would the designer design the eyeball in such a way that it's got this optical nerve package that punches right through the back and gives us these blind spots right out here to the sides? Why would we have blind spots? Why not just design the eyeball a slightly different way? Now, of course, the eyeball started out as a lens that was just a nerve that was slightly sensitive to light. And it evolved a whole package of things around it. The lens to focus it and everything, all that stuff evolved later. So this is all just building on the fact that you have an optical nerve, or you have a nerve that has a sensitive light patch at the end. That's where the eyeball comes from. And it makes sense if you realize that it just evolved hodgepodge without any direction or rationality. All right. Putting that in our pocket, let me transport you back to the year 2002 or 2003, right around there. There was me, Mr. Cropper, this is years before YouTube even existed, and I was thinking that if we could figure out a way to take one ingredient, just one thing, and have it sit there and do what it does and end up with complexity from just one ingredient, if we could find a way that that happens, then we would have the whole universe very easily assembled from the basic ingredient of energy. And I was reading through Newsweek, and there was a little news blurb about a new book that had come out. And this is a credit to the editor or whoever wrote that little news blurb about this, because they would every week in Newsweek they would do 2 books, 2 of the top 10 bestsellers. They would just give a little blurb about them. And this week they gave a little news blurb about A New Kind of Science by Stephen Wolfram. And reading that teeny news blurb, it's a credit to the writer that they were able to get the thesis of Stephen Wolfram, an operable version of his thesis, right there in that little news blurb. And it blew my mind. I said, that's the key I've been looking for. Somebody's proved it. That we can use one ingredient to get everything. Because I couldn't even find 2 ingredients. It's only energy, right? So I said, all right, that's an amazing thing. And I went to the bookstore and I read bits of it. I came home and I went back and read more. Told my girlfriend about it. She eventually bought me a copy for my birthday because it was like $40 or $50 back when, back in 2002. A hardcover book was $19.95 if it was pricey. It was $14.95 if it was regular. It was $12.95 for some. That was back when paperbacks were $5. So it was a pricey book, and of course you can't get used copies. It was a brand new book. So I got me a copy. I had a copy and I read it, and reading it, I have to say that I didn't really get more out of it except just thorough proof, thorough convincing. But I was already convinced of his thesis. I was convinced that his thesis had to be true for the universe to get where it is from where it came from. I was convinced of that. I just said, well, we need it to be shown that you can use one ingredient to get many things. And his book does exactly that. It shows complexity of a single rule or 2 single little rules with one particular item that does either this or that. It's either a black or a white box. And the rule is if the box next to it is black, then this one turns black. If the box next to it is white, this one turns white, or whatever the rule is. You can write different rules. If all the boxes around it are black, then it turns white, and not otherwise. And different rules. You can write different rules. And just with these very basic rules, you can create amazingly complex things. Now, put that in your pocket. So we've got the idea that we are designed is proved wrong by Richard Dawkins. We are not designed because it's too much of a mess and a hodgepodge. It only makes sense if we're accidental. Then we've got the fact that all of the ingredients in the universe today can come from a very, very basic list of one ingredient. We can get complexity from simplicity. Okay? All right, putting those in your pocket. Now, there's one last point I was going to get to. Let's see, what was it? Lastly, there's this argument that mathematically speaking, there's not been enough time in the history of the Earth, 3 billion years or so that life's been evolving, 3.2 or 3.7, however long life's been evolving. If you do mathematical calculations every single day during 3.2 billion years, you can come up to a certain number of mathematical calculations. And let's say that you can put some limit on how many calculations can be done per day by these organisms or whatever are doing the calculations. And by calculation, I mean something like when a male and female of whatever species have sex, calculations are done when the DNA splices into the new entity. That's a calculation. So let's say that you've got a degree at university and you've done the calculations and you find that there's not enough time in Earth history for us to get the complexity that we've arrived at today. I think that is one of the stupidest arguments I've ever heard. That's like saying bumblebees can't fly because mathematicians haven't figured out how they could do it. Because we take the size of their wings and the speed at which their wings flap and the amount of air that can move and how big their body is, you put it all together and they can't fly. And yet they fly. So I think that's not very smart. That only proves how stupid the mathematician is. You want to know whether or not it's possible for a bumblebee to fly? Look at the fact that they fly. Don't write a paper on how it's possible for them to fly. That's stupid. That just proves you're stupid. You want to know whether life can evolve? Look around you. It evolved. There's not a God, and life is here. So for you to say, I can't figure out inside my stupid little monkey brain how life could have evolved. I can't figure out where the calculations were done. There's too many calculations. You don't impress me. Not one bit. You're an idiot. Okay? That's what I think of that argument. Now, do you have anything else? Complexity is not a problem. Complexity can only arise through accident, and it looks exactly like it would if it did arise through accident. Piling complexity together and saying you've got too much complexity over time, that's not impressive either. Just because you aren't creative enough mathematically to understand how things came to be, it's not an argument. And the fact is that we can get everything in the universe from a very, very simple set of very, very simple rules. Everything in the universe, all the complexity of the universe from a very, very simple set of very simple rules. And that allows for the complexity of evolution and what was the other thing? Zeben64, user Zeben64 was worried about. He says, oh, but how do you get this or that? It's consciousness. Consciousness is a pocket of complexity, of supercomplexity, hypercomplexity. And you'll see that if you go through Stephen Wolfram's work. Some of these rules create areas that are structures that are quite mundane, but with little teeny areas inside of them that are just irreducibly complex. By irreducibly complex, I mean you would have to state the entire thing. You would have to reiterate it to say what it was. You couldn't, there's no way to condense it. All right? We have pockets of irreducible, uncondensable complexity, irreducible complexity that arise from very simple rules with black-white squares. All right? That shows you that complexity is possible in this universe. Not just from simple ingredients. Okay, now if you start off with complex ingredients, you've got a lot less work to do to get your complexity, right? The point is we had to prove this from simple ingredients, from energy, right? Energy gets cold and it turns into particles. Up quark, down quark, left quark, white quark, whatever, all these different things. But it all really comes down to just protons and neutrons, or whatever the basic thing is, quarks or whatever. And that's just energy. It just comes down to energy. So you have to make everything from one ingredient. Stephen Wolfram showed us how. Richard Dawkins has showed us that that's the only way that we could have come to be the way that we are. Fish, giraffes, and humans and everything else. And people who say that it's all too complex mathematically are as stupid as the people who say bumblebees can't fly. There you are. There is no argument from intelligent design that is not absurd and already proven wrong.